Afternoon here, otherwise largely dry and still feeling very warm in that sunshine, particularly in the southeast where we're going to see highs of 28.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Go and get another glass of that bubbly, you've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Karen Stephenson was born in Stoke-on-Trent and read music at Trinity College, Cambridge. She's played cello with many of the world's great orchestras under the batons of some of the most renowned conductors, and she joins me now to discuss her career and the importance of music in education. Tell me about that. What is your role at the Philharmonia?
My role at the Philharmonia is number 2 cello. I've been there for about 15 years. Sometimes I play number 1 cello as well, which is a great opportunity for me. Well,
it's interesting you say that because I often think what a very difficult life it is to be a professional musician.
I make a living out of it. It is definitely possible. Yeah, we don't really like it when we get into a taxi and someone says, "What's your day job?" Because we work really hard.
I was kind of making the opposite point. Not that you'd also have a day job. I think the perfection that is required for a professional musician is extraordinary. On the whole, we are intolerant of mistakes in classical music.
Yes, we are.
And I just wondered whether you don't become very frustrated with a world in which everything else is imperfect.
You are only as good as your last concert, Michael. That's how it feels. It is a lot of pressure. Sometimes we will say, OK, a pint for every wrong note or something, but depending on the piece of music, that could be quite dangerous.
How many hours a day do you have to practice?
You have to practice much more when you're younger, I think, when you're learning. I think this is really important. And when you're at music college. I'm a busy, I'm travelling, I have a family. I can't practice as much as I used to, so you have to rely on your experience. What I really wanted to say is that there's been a lot of fear-mongering about classical music being in decline and it not being relevant, and I really wanted to say that I don't think that's the case. Our audiences have increased. They're the highest they've been in 10 years.
The People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camila Tominey Show. Well, it seems Keir Starmer can handle a French downpour slightly better than Rishi Sunak. I'm going to be asking Steve Reed, the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, with Labour set to unveil a black hole in the public finances of around £20 billion, could this signal that tax rises are on the way? Why didn't they know about the black hole in the first place? We've all seen the accounts. I'm also going to be speaking to Shadow Paymaster General John Glen regarding rumours that Rishi Sunak doesn't want to be interim leader for much longer. Lord Craig Mackinlay, the incoming bionic peer, will also be here to share his thoughts on who will clinch the Tory leadership race. And author Dave Rich shares why we should still be worried about anti-Semitism. We've got 90 minutes of punchy politics lined up for you this morning, so do not even think of going anywhere. Right, let's get stuck into the Sunday papers with Giles Kenningham, former number 10 head of press. Lovely to see you this morning, Giles. I mean, leadership does dominate, but let's just talk about I've called it an unholy row about the £20 billion black hole in the finances. Rachel Reeves has been saying since she became Chancellor, this is the worst economic legacy anyone could inherit. We've already heard I mean, the phrase 14 years of Tory rule needs to go on a bingo sheet somewhere because we're going to be hearing it a lot, Giles. Do we find it credible for them to be saying there is this black hole?
I mean, it seems somewhat disingenuous because during the election she said, look, we won't be going to the Treasury looking under the bonnet and saying things are this bad because we have the OBR to tell us now how bad things are.
Budget responsibility.
And she said, we know how bad things are. This is why we can set out fully costed plans. So now it looks like they're laying the groundwork to possibly hike capital gains tax.
Yep, that's in the
possibly
Telegraph today.
Doing a raid on pensions in terms of tax relief, possibly hitting inheritance tax. And I think the issue here is, does she have a mandate to do this? Well, not really, because she should have squared with the public. And I would make the comparison of when the Conservatives came in 2010. They were very clear during that election race there are going to be some difficult cuts, some cutbacks, you know, to frontline services because the economy was in such a perilous state and they had a mandate to do it, and actually they had the buy-in from the electorate. They don't have that this time.
Clarify something for me, actually. The word austerity, was it originally used by Cameron and Osborne, or was it used against them? Because it's kind of given spending cuts a bad name, right? The idea that Labour could even mention the A word just isn't going to happen.
I'm not sure. I think what was disingenuous was that Labour always said that it was a sort of choice of Cameron and Osborne to make these cuts. Whoever had come in 2010 would have had to make pretty deep cuts. And indeed, Alistair Darling, in his budget for the election in 2010, set out pretty sweeping cuts as well.
I'm thinking that, you know, there's always a buzzword, isn't there? And Gordon Brown very much was hammering home this idea of the global economic crisis.
I mean, I think what we were also keen to point out in that situation, there were also a lot of savings which could be made, which weren't cuts. You know, and you can still protect some frontline services in the process.
But as you say, there's some coverage this morning about wealth taxes that will be needed to plug the fiscal black hole. I'm going to be speaking to Steve Reid, the Environment Secretary, about some of this mathematics a little later, Giles. Let's move on to the Tory leadership, though. Front page of the Sunday Express. Well, Priti Patel will be delighted that she has announced her candidacy and it's made the front page of that newspaper. I mean, the Sunday Express, very much Priti Patel's kind of people, I would say, on the right, robust on Europe, were Brexiteers, think that the grassroots should have a say. What's your analysis? You're going to stay a little later today after the newspapers and be joined by Jeff Hoon to drill into the detail of the leadership a bit more. But just on Priti as an individual, what's your analysis of her chances?
Quite pointed in this opinion piece, she talks about empowering the membership and giving them a lot more of a say, and clearly they'll have the final say on the votes. Look, I think Priti stands a very good chance. I think if she gets to the final two, and I think she'll definitely win. She's quite liked by the parliamentary party as well. I think the problem for her at the moment is she doesn't poll that well with the public. If you get someone coming through, a bit like how David Cameron did in 2005, who might not be the front runner but does very well in public polling, that might get them over the line. So I think, look, it's wide open at the moment. It's like the Grand National. I think you're going to have 6, 7 people running in it. And I think a lot of MPs are going to be holding their counsel over the summer and not rushing to support people. So there's plenty of time for people who are a bit further back in the race to come forward.
On that membership front, you could say that that's self-interested because she knows she is going to be popular with the membership, so she needs to end up in that final two on the final ballot. However, this talk in the past of sort of cutting out the membership, and maybe this is slightly associated with Cameroonian politics on the Tories, is that right? I mean, the membership have to have a say. I know they're actually having a similar debate in Labour. There's a story today suggesting that Keir Starmer wants to cut out the membership to ensure that candidates like Angela Rayner can never be Prime Minister. But what's your thought?
No, I think it's important they have a stake in the leadership. I mean, there has been talk of possibly changing the dynamics and membership choose the final three, then the MPs vote. But certainly they've got to have some buy-in. I'm, a big believer in that.
Yeah, I think that they would be in uproar if they didn't. And also, a lot of these members are, of course, the activists that go on the stump.
Yeah, they are the sort of the boots on the ground who actually help deliver the votes.
The thin or thick blue line, as they say. Well, we'll get on to leadership because, as I say, you're staying after the break so we can have a further chat about that. But let's talk about the new CCTV that has emerged from Manchester Airport. So, Giles, you'll be familiar with the story in the week involving 2 brothers, a fight at Terminal 2. We got some of the footage, didn't we? We got somebody filming it as a police officer appeared to kick one of the brothers and stamp on his head. That obviously then provoked an outroar. There was a protest outside Rochdale police station. It was pelted with eggs, sort of had some agitators saying we're going to cause havoc. To be fair, it was all largely peaceful, but we've now got a little bit of a different side to this story.
Yeah, you've got the sort of, I think, the full version now, which actually shows some really brutal images of the 3 policemen, police officers being attacked, a woman being brutally hit to the ground. And you have to ask why this footage wasn't released quicker. But also, I would say that there were some politicians who were a bit too quick to rush to judgment in this kind of age of a Twitter pylon.
Name names, Charles. Who did you think?
I think there were a couple of Labour MPs who were just too quick. And I think, to be fair to Andy Burnham, he did say at the start this is a complicated picture and was measured in his language. I think other people should have followed him there.
Do you think it's a problem these days for the police to constantly be being filmed? On one hand, you've got body cam footage that the press always asks for in an event like this, and actually you don't get it until months later. The void is then filled with punters standing around with their mobile phones. It's selective recording in a way, because somebody gets this bit, they haven't got their phone out in time, they've missed the beginning, they've missed the end. It's difficult. We saw this during the pro-Palestinian marches with, like, selective pieces of footage, then incriminating the police in difficult situations.
I mean, it's hard, the genie's out of the bottle, yes. I think it's the reality they are going to get filmed, but I think it's important that people are measured, and especially politicians. There isn't a rush to judgment in this situation. Police have an incredibly difficult job.
I wrote a column at the weekend basically saying that, in this case, what I couldn't quite understand is Greater Manchester Police said that they would take the officer concerned off operational duties pending an independent investigation by the body that investigates the police. So you then, therefore, see due process being followed. It's like, we're a rule of law nation, that's what should happen. And yet, increasingly, we see that people want more than that. You know, they're not quite happy with the idea of an independent investigation to find out what went wrong on both sides. They want to go and throw eggs at the police station.
There's this culture of immediacy where everyone needs a verdict right now. We need a rush judgment, and we need to know right away without actually being considered. And I think it's to the detriment of public debate that we're in this situation.
And also for the police, I think, you know, they're going about trying to do their jobs and everything is automatically...
And bear in mind, this was at an airport, so highly charged, difficult situation, probably exactly worried about some kind of terror attack.
Indeed so. Let's have a look now. Right, a couple of really interesting stories. One talking about... Gabriel Pogrund has written this for the Sunday Times, and it's talking about a man called Iqbal Mohammed who has been elected as the new MP for Dewsbury and Batley. Now, Giles, you need to explain the sort of law on this one first, because this man basically is sort of standing on a platform. There's video that the Sunday Times has obtained of him during the election campaign kind of saying, I'm paraphrasing, but, you know, if you're a good Muslim, if you believe in the Prophet Muhammad, then it's probably best to vote for me. Your reaction to that, first of all, and then an explainer as to why that shouldn't really be happening.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm no expert in this, but apparently he was saying you've got to follow the teachings of the Prophet, and it could be that he breached electoral law by putting undue spiritual pressure on people. I think it comes back to what we were saying before. Politicians sit in this position of responsibility to be very careful on the language they use. And I would make the observation that I think, particularly at the moment, we should be focusing much more on what unites us rather than divides us. And I think this is one of the failings of Labour's policy on multiculturalism, as it sort of saw communities in silos, as opposed to thinking, how can we bind communities together?
On election night, 'cause I know you were working, as was I, in a way, the Portillo moment turned out to be Jonathan Ashworth losing in Leicester, didn't it? And Michael himself would say it has to be a Portillo. If for it to be a Portillo moment, you have to not be expecting it. So that didn't apply to Jeremy Hunt, Penny Mordaunt, you know, Grant Shapps and all the others. You could half argue for Liz Truss, but it looked like the writing was on the wall a few days before. That Ashworth being unseated and the problems that Labour had being re-elected, not just in Ilford, where we're streeting is the MP, but in Birmingham, in a number of seats in Birmingham. I mean, in general, what was your reaction to that on the night, this sort of surge in these pro-Palestinian candidates knocking Labour off their perch?
Well, I think it showed, I mean, you had a lot more independent MPs that have been elected, I think, in 70, 80 years this time. I think make the wider observation that kind of the days of people having hardcore party political affiliations has gone. The electorate's a lot more volatile. I think also for all MPs, they can't take their seats for granted. They've really got to work them.
Do you think this is something that's going to be on the rise? I mean, we'll have to see what these independents do. Do they band together? Do they campaign as one?
I think you might see a lot more, because I think the electorate's a lot more volatile, hence why you had that. 5 years ago, it would have been inconceivable to have said that Starmer could have come back with a majority, let alone a stonking majority. And I think it just shows. So I think equally, whilst conventional wisdom would say the Tories will probably, lose the next election, I don't think it's a done deal, because I think there is such volatility in the system.
Let's just look at a final kind of related story. Hate cleric with his own army raises $3 million to create Islamic homeland on Scottish island. This is a story in the Mail on Sunday. It concerns a man called Sheikh Yasser al-Habib, who claimed asylum in Britain 20 years ago after fleeing his native Kuwait. And he's basically trying to buy the island of Torsa in the Inner Hebrides and set up a sort of, an Islamic state with Sharia law on this island. I mean, it seems like a remarkable story. Your reaction to this, Charles?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say, my initial reaction doesn't feel like particularly a good thing, because once again, it's kind of a community living isolated off from the rest of the UK. I think it will raise alarm bells. I don't know how close it is to happening and why we're in this situation. But yeah.
Seems so strange. I'm just looking at the map here. It's near the Isle of Mull and Oban. I mean, you make that point about more that unites us than divides us. Have we had a problem in this country with perhaps some of the different leaders of these faiths not getting together and trying to create more heart? Feels like we're living in disharmonious times.
Yeah, we live in a situation where the debate is very binary, when a lot of the time it is not black and white, it's grey. So, yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to be speaking to Dave Rich, who's written a book about anti-Semitism, a little later on the show, so I'm sure he'll also give us his pennyworth on how we could all get on a little better with each other. Giles, you're hanging around because you're going to do a leadership chat with Geoff Hoon, the former Labour Defence Secretary, in just a moment. So don't go anywhere, because we're going to be drilling into the detail of who's standing, who looks likely to get through to the round at least of 4, who might end up in the final 2, and what all of the different prospects are. And I'm going to ask Geoff Hoon an interesting question, which is, who would Keir Starmer fear the most across the dispatch box? Don't go anywhere.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Anton du Beke, and even I know that's a big name, has become the latest Strictly Come Dancing pro to come under some sort of fire amid the show's misconduct probe.
Yeah, his former partner, Leila Ruiz, told her lawyers that du Beke made offensive comments to her back in 2009.
Which you have to accept is quite a while ago, but it's almost as though things are building. He has since apologised, and she has accepted the apology. But what on earth is absolutely going on inside Strictly Come Dancing?
I have to say it has been a strictly witch hunt this week, because, it's been like the snowball effect. A couple of months ago we had Amanda Abbington, who came out with accusations against Giovanni Panice.
Now, I don't even know who she is. Who is she?
So she's an actress. She's been on there she is. She left the show early because she said due to personal distress. She now then came out and said actually working with Giovanni Panice caused her PSTD. Another dancer, Graziano Di Prima, who's now left because there was videos that had surfaced that apparently he was physically abusive towards his partner Zara McDermott, who this week actually came up with her side of the story and said that actually during training sessions she was kicked by him and physically abused by him. So he's now left the show.
Is this a case of celebrities being snowflakes, or is there something in this? Is this something more sinister?
Martin, there's always two sides to the story, and the dancers are coming from that point of view where they say it's because we want to win. But when you're a celebrity who might not have much dancing experience, you think about the glitz and the glamour of Strictly, but what we're hearing now is a lot of celebrities over the years have said, I've been left with PSTD. I was physically abused when I was on Strictly, verbally abused. And so now we're getting all the other sides to what actually celebrities are saying they're experiencing.
The People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christys. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have said storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christys tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Right, let's talk about the Tory leadership race because somebody has to. And I'm joined back in the studio by Giles Kenningham and Geoff Hoon, former Defence Secretary. You can't say, Geoff, just because you're on the left, that you don't care about this, because it is important, because we must pick a leader of the opposition that can take the fight to Labour. First question, though, chaps, are we picking a leader of the opposition or are we picking a potential future Prime Minister? And I ask that because we could have a kind of interim, holding the fort type candidate until somebody better rises like a phoenix from the flames of what's left of the Tories. Geoff, what do you reckon?
Well, I think it could be some time before a Conservative candidate emerges who's capable of being Prime Minister. And the reason is that political parties have a problem in the sense that their membership believe in things. They join political parties because they want to do things inside the party. The reality is most members of the public only really take notice of politics general election time and then probably briefly, with the result that there's a gap between the people that parties choose to be their leader and the people who the electorate choose to be Prime Minister. And it means, generally speaking, that the political parties choose people who are like them. So if you're a member of the Conservative Party, and I have to say it applies equally to the Labour Party, the people who vote in a one-member, one-vote final decision are people who are choosing candidates who feel and look like them. They are not necessarily the people that the country wants to lead the country.
Giles?
Well, I think the jury's still out. I think there needs to be a long campaign, which there is going to be, to test people. I mean, you saw what happened when Theresa May was anointed in effectively a coronation when she wasn't tested. So I think, I don't know yet. I mean, there isn't a big talent pool, that is clear. You know, you've got 120, 121 MPs to choose from. So I think we could have a situation where, this person is basically just a holding sort of leadership, and maybe someone else will come through in a by-election potentially down the line.
Let's go through the candidates and then you can give me very brief reactions to both, if you don't mind. James Cleverly, former Home Secretary. Geoff?
Well, the same point I've just made. He will appeal to the Conservative faithful. I don't think he appeals to the electorate.
Maybe the electorate doesn't really know him, but he's not that recognisable as a character, is he?
Well, he's had some big jobs and he ought to be known amongst the public, but I just don't think they will go for him.
Giles?
Good media performer, reasonably well-liked in the party. Could see him coming through as a compromise candidate.
Compromise candidate, all right, fair enough. Suella Braverman, I mean, I've got her down, but we haven't heard anything from Camp Braverman. There's suggestions she doesn't even have the 10 MP support to make it onto this first list, the long list. Geoff?
Well, presumably it's quite difficult to get 10 Tory MPs at the moment, given the size of the field already running.
Well, yeah, if we've got 7 candidates all needing a different 10, then that's up to 70 already, and then there's only, 50 left. Giles, is it surprising that she hasn't gained any more momentum? Because she's been very vocal.
Very vocal, but no, I think she's out. I think
you don't think she's going to be able to?
Most of her supporters have gone to Jenrick. I think we would have heard something from her by now. I don't think she'll make the final cut.
Geoff, Mel Stride. Now, former work and pensions appeared a lot on the broadcast round. Sometimes it's hard when you get landed with the broadcast round because you can't do enough kind of constituency campaigning. Maybe that was Jonathan Ashworth's problem as well. I know there was sort of sectarianism involved in Leicester, but it was also on the broadcast round the whole time. I mean, outside chance, Mel Stride? Or could he be that candidate nobody's thought of that could just rise through the middle?
I don't know much about him, frankly, but at the same time, appearing on the television is a very helpful way of projecting your image and your appeal to an electorate that's spread right across the country. So that will give him a boost, certainly.
Giles, what do we know about Mel Stride?
Look, he's been a competent media performer, steady hand on the tiller. I think for the Tories, they need someone younger if they're going to be like talking about, optimism.
He's not
hope.
the most charismatic either.
Not the most charismatic, and he is plus 60. I think they need to go for someone, as I said, a little bit younger.
Who do you think Keir Starmer would fear most?
None of the above at the moment.
I've got Kemi down as the person I thought, because she had quite a good go at Angela Rayner last week in the House of Commons. It's sort of gone viral online. I mean, she doesn't pull any punches. That could be a problem, Giles. We'll get onto that in a minute. But, Jeff?
Well, going back to what I said earlier, the challenge to Labour has to come from the centre, maybe centre-right. I don't believe that it can come from the right of the Tory party, but by and large, the Conservative membership will choose and have generally chosen the candidate who's furthest to the right.
But what are you saying, that you don't think Badenoch's right-wing enough, then?
Well, they've got a problem, because they've got to appeal to a right-wing Conservative membership in order to win the leadership. Yeah. But then they've got to appeal to the country, who I believe are broadly in the centre and don't want a right-winger.
Starmer did that. He totally tapped left and then tapped back to the centre.
Yeah,
to
Starmer's been
buy
all
off
over.
the Corbynites. So he's
2020, he's a Corbynista.
He's a classic kind of shifter.
2024, he's a Blairite.
But the difference today for the Conservative Party, it seems to me, is that you've got this group on the right. So you've got reform. Yeah. And I would have thought that the election of a new leader will be all about their relationship with reform.
And how to out-Farage. Giles, just on Badenoch, I mean, on one hand, people love her because she's really punchy and she says what she thinks and she doesn't hold back. Could also be a problem for her, though.
Yeah, I mean, look, she's got to be a unifying figure at this point, and I know that she does in certain pockets of the Tory party polarise opinions, so she's got to sort of bring that constituency with her. In relation to who would Starmer fear the most, look, he's not a great orator. He's not particularly light on his feet. He's no Blair. He's no Cameron in the House of Commons. I don't think it's clear yet who the Tories' star performer is, but I think he's there to be taken, certainly in PMQs.
Priti Patel, Jeff.
I think too much baggage.
She's been around a long time.
Too much baggage.
Too much baggage?
I think she's someone who, again, might well appeal to the Conservative Party faithful, but will go down like a bomb in the country.
Well, she's not very popular on social media, but that's not necessarily a test.
It's not like the wider public, though, is it? It's kind of its own echo chamber. Look, Priti, I'd say, very popular with the membership. I think it goes to the final two. She'll definitely win. And quite well liked by MPs as well. I think the key for her is she needs to poll better with the public and to see if those poll ratings improve during the race.
Wider public beyond the Tory kind of support. Can we talk about Tom Tugendhat? We did have a little chat about it out there, didn't we? And let's be honest, 2 years ago, he's saying he wouldn't leave the ECHR. This week, he writes an op-ed in The Telegraph saying, oh, actually, I would. But in the same op-ed says, I'm somebody who keeps my promises and we must build trust. Was that a mistake, Charles?
Well, I think he's he's trying to square off the right of the party and then he'll tap back to centre. I mean, look, I think he's still got a chance. You know, he is probably the One Nation's favourite, sort of. But if he's in the final two versus someone who's more on the right, like Patel, I would think he'd probably lose.
He'll lose on the final ballot. I mean, this is your point, Jeff. This kind of man might appeal to the country at large because he's more centrist. He's already flip-flopping on week one.
I think the risk of doing that, and I've got a long memory in these things, is what happened to Michael Portillo. Michael Portillo should have been the leader of the Conservative Party, but before the decision, he basically tapped to the left to try and pick up centre ground support. As a result, the people on the right didn't trust him, and the centrist MPs didn't trust him either. And I think Tom Tugendhat's problem now, although he is the kind of figure that I think should lead the Conservative Party and would be an effective opposition leader, the reality is, by doing what he's done on the ECHR, I really wonder whether some of the centre ground MPs might question what he's up to.
But those of them left very quick. Well, no, go on to ask. We've got 2 minutes left.
It's interesting. If you get a candidate, say he's second or third, but they poll so far ahead with the public, they may come through. I mean, that's what happened to Cameron. I think he was number 2, number 3 in the race. And Frank Luntz, the Republican pollster, did a poll for Newsnight which showed that amongst the public, people preferred him to Gordon Brown, you know, to the Lib Dems.
And then the Tory base says, well, hang on a minute, this is
they weren't necessarily in love with him, but they thought this guy can win. So I think there's still that.
But I think the big difference there, and it happened with Tony Blair, and I think it happened with Keir Starmer, and it certainly happened with David Cameron, is that the party that they led had been out of power for a very long time. And then the electorate, that is the members of the party, realised they'd got to choose somebody who appealed to the country. We're not at that point yet. The Tory party have not been out of power for long enough, and that's why they chose in the past people like Ian Duncan Smith, a thoroughly decent man, but not somebody who appealed to the electorate.
Very quick word on Robert Jenrick. We wouldn't want to leave him out. Time is running out so quickly, Giles. He's been on a journey And he wants to take the Conservatives on the same journey.
Yeah, he's been on a journey. Look, he's been positioning to do this for a long time. It all started when he stepped down, he resigned.
Yes,
in
came in
protest.
the studio, sat there. I said, you've had a haircut and lost some weight. Do you want to run for the Tory leadership? Oh, no. The next thing we know.
When he resigned as immigration minister. Look, he is the one at the moment who's got momentum. Let's see. It feels like he's picked off a lot of Braverman supporters.
Very briefly, Jeff.
Well, he comes from my part of the world, the East Midlands. He's certainly made a name for himself, and I can see him being quite a strong candidate.
What's interesting about Jenrick as well is he seems to have sucked up a lot of that Suella Braverman previous support. So the Common Sense group of Tories, if that isn't an oxymoron, are now backing him rather than her, which means Braverman might not end up declaring at all next week. But let's wait and see. Well, thank you very much to Giles and indeed to Jeff for that very convivial chat between blue and red about the future of the Tory leadership. Coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to Labour Minister Steve Reid. Stay tuned, it's feisty.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on the chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
King Charles has launched his own aftershave, costing, wait for it, an eye-watering £135 for a 100 millilitre bottle, promising buyers that they can smell just like the gardens of his Highgrove country pile. Now, this is something that Meghan Markle would do, surely not the King. Is this a case of King Charles selling out, watering down the brand just like Meghan? Well, join me now to discuss this is the royal broadcaster Helena Chard. Helena, welcome to the show.
Martin,
often on this
hi.
show, we've had a pop at Meghan Markle, the Sussexers, for selling out, for flogging strawberry jam, and now the King is flogging Pong. Is this really the right royal thing to do?
Do you know what? So the joy of luxury Highgrove splash, you know, at the end of the day, Highgrove is such a special place, and the Highgrove shop sells amazing things on there. And as we know, the profit actually goes towards charity. So it's the King's Foundation, which was formed in 1986. Profits go towards educational and training, and it's all to do with this sort of sustainable world. But not to forget as well the charitable aspect and the whole ethos of the King's Foundation, and that's so important. This is not just something that's going up on the website and just being sold purely to go into someone's pocket. So I think, you know, all in all, I think everyone should have a look at the Highgrove website and see what's on for sale. I mean, there are lots of really lovely, I think, pretty fairly priced products, and even more so, go and see the gardens. You know, as we know, King Charles is a keen environmentalist, and the gardens are fabulous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Much more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be joined by the Shadow Paymaster General and close ally of Rishi Sunak, John Glen, and the Environment Secretary, Steve Reid, will join me for what turned out to be quite a feisty interview earlier today. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Camilla. Good morning. Just after 10 a.m, our top stories this hour. Manchester's mayor is urging people not to rush to judgment following Thursday's incident at an airport. Andy Burnham's comments follow the publication of new video obtained by Manchester Evening News, which appears to show a violent altercation in the lead-up to a suspect being kicked by a police officer. The constable is under criminal investigation for assault. Mr Burnham says it's a complicated situation with two sides to it. Former Met Detective Peter Blexley agrees.
There's a number of people that look really daft this morning who were very quick to rush to judgment with absolutely appalling language being pointed in the direction of certain police officers. And this incident now, which I again reiterate, we still have not seen all of, is going to test, of course, our police, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the Crown Prosecution Service, the Greater Manchester Police. And I would say, where's the Home Secretary? Where's the Prime Minister?
Priti Patel has become the 5th MP to enter the Tory leadership race. The former Home Secretary says she can unite the party and turn it back into, quote, a winning machine. She joins James Cleverly, Tom Tugendhat, Robert Jenrick and Mel Stride, running to replace Rishi Sunak. Nominations close tomorrow. Former Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party, Brendan Clark-Smith, told us Ms Patel will be popular with members.
Is a good lineup there. But I think if you look at Priti Patel and particularly a relationship with party members as well, they felt very unloved, some of them fairly demoralised after the election campaign. They need somebody who can pick them up again, someone with a bit of vision, someone who's a real blue-blooded Conservative. And I think Priti Patel, she actually fits that description pretty well, I'd say.
Labour is set to overhaul planning rules to build 1.5 million homes in 5 years. Writing in The Observer, Angela Rayner said that delivering social and affordable houses at scale is her #1 priority. This week, the Deputy PM and Housing Secretary will announce plans to bring back mandatory housing targets. She'll also outline a focus on grey belt land, building on disused car parks and wasteland. A man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a woman sustained a serious head injury in Suffolk. 57-year-old Anita Rose had been walking her dog when she was found unconscious in Brantham shortly after 8 a.m. on Wednesday. She remains in a critical condition. A 45-year-old man from the Ipswich area is currently being questioned. It's not believed that the suspect was known to the victim. Israel has carried out air attacks against Hezbollah in Lebanon overnight after a rocket killed 12 people, including children, in an Israeli-occupied area of Golan Heights. Well, Israel has released this footage, which it says shows weapons caches and terrorist infrastructure being targeted deep inside Lebanese territory. The country has vowed to inflict a heavy price after a rocket struck a football pitch in the village of Majdal Shams, the deadliest attack on Israeli territory since the start of the conflict. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Ray Addison. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Ray. Welcome back. In just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to the Shadow Paymaster General, John Glen, a close ally of Rishi Sunak. What does he make of the Tory candidates vying to replace him as Tory leader? I'm going to be joined by the Environment Secretary, Steve Reid. Will the government continue to lay the ground for a "there's no money left" statement tomorrow? And I'm going to be joined by Lord Craig Mackinlay and ask him who would be best suited to lead the Tories and see off the threat from Nigel Farage and Reform. And Dave Rich is going to share his new book, which looks at why anti-Semitism is still a huge issue today. Even more so, of course, after the events of October the 7th. But I'm delighted to be joined now by Shadow Paymaster General John Glen, the MP for Salisbury and South Wiltshire. Lovely to see you this morning, Mr Glen. Thank you so much for your time on a sunny Sunday. Yeah. Let's talk about Labour continually suggesting that they didn't know what economic legacy they were inheriting. I mean, you were in the Treasury for 5 years. We'll get on to whether the legacy is as bad as they think in just a moment. But just in general, did they know what they were getting? How does it work? Are the public accounts all available? They're talking about not knowing about a £20 billion black hole.
It's absolutely ridiculous. When we set up the Office of Budget Responsibility, it's all open. They mirror the Treasury's figures every fiscal event. And there's complete transparency. We showed how we balanced the book. Now, there's many people who've been on your show here over the last 6 months who are frustrated that we didn't have enough tax cuts. We made difficult decisions to balance the books. And, we got inflation down to 2%. We saw that, we were the fastest growing economies, the fastest growing economy in the first quarter of the year. We'd love to have faster growing economies across the G7, but that hasn't happened. There are always pressures, every fiscal event, every spending department will say, we need a bit more, Chancellor, we need a bit more here and a bit more there. And to govern is to take those tough decisions and to put reforms in place to reduce the number of civil servants, the welfare reforms that we said to get that additional, thousands of people, tens of people back into work. And it's by taking those decisions that you manage some of those pressures. And indeed, last year, when we had the review of the pay review bodies, we didn't borrow more or increase taxes. We made departments absorb those additional costs.
Having said that, you've made yourselves such easy targets for criticism, haven't you? I mean, the public listens to Rachel Reeves talking about having inherited the worst set of economic circumstances since the Second World War. They believe her. I mean, you could argue in kind of counter to that, well, we had to deal with COVID and we had to deal with the war in Ukraine and all the rest of it. The tax burden has gone up under the Tories, so you've squandered your reputation for fiscal discipline and you've conceded to Labour.
Not at all. We've had this discussion before. When you borrow that quantum of money, you can't just wipe it out just like that. You've got high levels of debt interest. And if you look at public sector net borrowing, when we came into power in 2010, it was 10.3%. It's now 4.4%. Completely different. We've taken those tough decisions, but you can't just shout, we need more tax cuts and we've lost credibility because of that, when you don't take account of the extent of the borrowing and money that was spent to keep the economy and the country going. And then, of course, the displacements in the public services weren't going to be fixed overnight. It's an incredibly painful legacy for the party and for us, but, it's one that we've got to come to terms with.
All right, let's move on to the leadership. There's quite a lot of talk, just kind of like in the tea room and beyond, that journalists are picking up on, myself included. That although he said he wants to serve for another 4 years, Rishi Sunak, that he's not that comfortable being interim leader for that long, that there was a caucus of people, himself included, sort of agitating for this leadership race to be done a little quicker. He's got to stay on till November. Is he still going to be around and an MP next year, do you think, Mr Glen?
I very much expect so. Look, he took on the leadership in 2022 after he'd lost it in the summer, and he never had the support that was required, the unity that was required, despite moving forward with the Windsor framework, taking a number of bold decisions and getting our inflation down to 2%, and really doing what was right in difficult political circumstances. He's a man of great integrity. He will do what is required for the party. I'm sure he feels and does feel this defeat personally. He's taken responsibility for it. And I think most people recognise the way he's conducted himself. It demonstrates, the man's great personal qualities.
But can you guarantee, Mr Glen, that he'll still be around in 4 to 5 years' time when the Tories come to fight the next general election?
Look, I can't speak for he said he'll stay for the whole of this parliament. He's got 2 young children at school. I can't predict. I don't know where I will be in 4 or 5 years' time. We don't know what the future holds. I very much hope so. I think he's got a lot to contribute to national life. I work closely with him in the Treasury and I have a very high regard for him.
All right, then, Mr Glen, let's have a look at some of these candidates. You'll be familiar with the names by now. Who takes your fancy? Mel Stride, James Cleverly, Tom Tugendhat, Priti Patel, Robert Jenrick?
Look, I rate them all. They've all made a significant contribution in different ways. I think what I think the Conservative Party needs to do is come to terms with this historic, catastrophic defeat, show a degree of humility and reflection over the summer, and allow our membership to be driving the outcome of this selection process. So I'm not going to be drawn on who I would be supporting yet, because I want to see all of them address many dimensions of the challenges we face, both as a party, but more importantly as a country. And there's 2 things here. There's about who's the most credible figure to be leading us in opposition, and who's going to then, actually on the back of that, be credible as a future candidate to be Prime Minister. And I think we need a lot of scrutiny over the next 3 or 4 months. I respect all of them for having the courage to stand, and I hope that we'll have a clean and helpful contest as we lay the foundations for recovery.
Having said that, is it a bit wrong-headed to announce the next leader on November the 2nd, just 3 days before the US election? I mean, this is in opposition. You're basically invisible, aren't you, Mr. Glen? No one really pays that much notice to what you're saying. This is the Tories' moment to be in the spotlight, and frankly, it's going to be completely overshadowed by whatever's going on in the US.
Look, events happen all the time. We could have anything could happen on the world stage, or indeed in this country. What's important is that the party have the opportunity at the conference, which seems to be in the natural place to be able to actually look at all the candidates close up, with the natural point of focus of members coming together for that event. And there obviously needs to be an interval of time to deal with the voting process. I'm sure the party have done everything they can to work it as quickly as possible within reasonable parameters. I mean,
Final question.
There's no easy way of doing it.
There's never an easy way. Mr. Glen, final question. It looks like Suella Braverman might not make the cut. That may please and cheer up Rishi Sunak after a difficult summer, mightn't it?
Well, look, I'm not going to fuel any more speculations of tensions between candidates. The country has had enough of that. People coming on GB News, slagging off different candidates. We need to get on.
Who's been slagging off different candidates?
Over the last 18 months. I think you know very well.
Oh, I see. You mean Miss Braverman coming in here and slagging off Rishi Sunak? Is that what you mean?
4 months. No, I wasn't meaning that. What I was meaning is, I think the country want an orderly process for selecting a candidate that's clean and honest about where we failed, and actually clear-headed about where we need to go. I think that's what the party wants and needs right now. And I wish all the candidates well through that journey, and that whoever wins will have my full loyal support.
John Glen, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've heard from the Tories. Next, we're going to hear from Labour. I did pre-record the interview with Steve Reed. It's great. Stay tuned. Back in 2 with that.
Patrick Christys Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Should Prince Harry have accepted an award named after a US war hero at a glitzy ceremony last night? People begged him not to, but he did it anyway. It's time for tonight's head-to-head. Well, Prince Harry paid tribute to the eternal bond between mother and son as he appeared alongside his wife, Meghan Markle, at the glitzy ESPY Awards, dubbed the Sporting Oscars last night. The Duke accepted the Pat Tillman Award, named after a US war hero, for his Invictus Games work. But Harry's decision to accept the award was shrouded in controversy after more than 76,000 people signed a petition demanding he reverse his decision. Well, speaking last night, Harry paid tribute to Pat Tillman's mother, Mary. But that comes after Mary Tillman slammed his decision to give Prince Harry the gong, saying, "I am shocked as to why they would select such a controversial and divisive individual to receive the award. There are recipients that are far more fitting. These individuals do not have the money, resources, connections or privilege that Prince Harry has." So tonight I'm asking, should Harry have actually accepted the award? Let me know your thoughts. Go to gbnews.com/your say. Tweet me at gbnews and make sure you take part in our poll. But going head-to-head on this now, a former royal butler, Grant Harold, and the journalist and broadcaster, Laurie Turner. Thank you very much. Great to have you both on the show. Laurie, I will start with you. I mean, the mother didn't want Harry to have it, but he did it anyway. What do you think?
I just think it's incredibly tone deaf. He seems to have an amazing ability to not read the room. It wasn't like this was a surprise, because the opposition to him getting this award had been growing. So he had the chance to say, actually, I hear what you're saying, I'm not going to accept the award, but he didn't.
GB News, the People's Channel. Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to the Camila Tominey Show on GB News. Earlier on, I was joined by the Environment Secretary, Steve Reid. It's a great interview. Stay tuned for it, because this is what he had to say. Well, Steve Reid, the Environment Secretary and the MP for Streatham and Croydon North, joins me now in the studio. Lovely to see you. Thank you very much for coming in. Rivers, I know our audience is very concerned about how polluted they are. Not just rivers, actually, our seas too. I noticed some coverage about surfers up in arms this morning about the state of our waters. What's Labour going to do about it?
Well, first of all, people are absolutely furious about the polluted state of our rivers, lakes and our seas. Last year, we saw record levels of sewage being pumped into our waterways. It's damaging tourism. It's making kids sick if they go to paddle. We even had the Oxford and Cambridge boat race where some of the rowers were getting sick as well. It's happening because the Conservative government turned a blind eye while the water companies were pumping this stuff into the waterways. So Labour's going to get a grip of the situation. Within 7 days of the election and my appointment as Environment Secretary, I had the water company bosses in my office and they signed up to an initial package of measures. There's more in the King's speech. We put forward a water special measures bill, and that includes bringing back accountability into the system. So if water bosses keep pumping these levels of raw sewage into our waterways, they'll face criminal charges. We'll give the regulator the power they need to ban the payment of the multi-million-pound bonuses they've been awarding themselves despite overseeing this kind of catastrophic failure. And we're going to ring-fence customers' money that is earmarked for investment in improving the sewage infrastructure so that if it's not spent on that, it gets refunded back to customers in discounts off their bills. So by taking measures like that, common sense measures, we focus the sector on cleaning up our water rather than lining their own pockets.
And have you set any target on that from a time perspective? When do you expect water quality to be improved by?
Well, we're working right now by strengthening. It's an interesting aspect of the problem, this, but by strengthening regulation and applying it more consistently, we make the sector more investable. So we're hoping to bring in £88 billion of private sector investment, not taxpayers' money, private sector investment over the 5 years of this government so that we can see visible improvement over that
But have the water companies been given targets, you know, water quality must improve by 2027?
There will be. As soon as we've got that that investment secured, we will be sitting down with them and making clear what we expect to see by when. You know, we need to get away from the sticking plaster approach. There's a very profound problem here. It's going to take, it's not an overnight fix.
No.
We need a long-term plan, but we will make sure that it's broken down into milestones along the way so the public can see whether or not the water companies are meeting the targets that we give them.
And that £88 billion investment, which you're saying is going to be made by private companies.
That's right.
How much is it going to cost the taxpayer, though, to help clean up our waters?
Well, it won't cost the taxpayer anything. This will come in through private sector investment. Ofwat has proposed an increase in bills over the next 4 years. Now, had the previous government taken these measures 14 years ago, then the sewage system would not have crumbled to the extent that it has, and it wouldn't be necessary to put bills up. But we will not be turning to the taxpayer. This is private sector investment. 88 billion actually is the biggest ever investment in the water sector and will be the second biggest investment in the entire economy over the lifetime of this government.
Is that over the course of this Parliament?
This Parliament, just this Parliament. I mean, that's jobs. It's well-paid jobs up and down the country starting to do the work of rebuilding our infrastructure, but it will clean up our waterways eventually.
I'm sure the taxpayer will be gratified not to have to shoulder the burden of this, not least because Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is suggesting that there's a 20 billion black hole in the finances. Now, the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, says it's not credible to say that because all of the public accounts are, by their definition, public. So how can she be saying that she's surprised by this black hole? You've known what's in the public finances for years, haven't you?
Well, sadly, we didn't, because the Conservative government were not open and transparent about what was going on. And we've come in now
with an
absolutely catastrophic inheritance
show the accounts during the last budget? Because the IFS and other bodies, including the OBR, had to pour through them. So Labour had access to the accounts.
Well, let me give you a couple.
I'll
give you a couple of examples of how and what they covered up. So the Rwanda gimmick. We believed going into the election, because the previous government was telling us that they had spent £400 million to send just 4 volunteers to Rwanda. It turns out, when Yvette Cooper is appointed Home Secretary and goes into the department, it was 700 million. That is 75% more than we were told, 300 million that the Conservatives cannot say how they're going to fund. It's examples like that that have inflated this black hole, and that this government intends to be open and transparent about, doing the audit, and Rachel will be reporting on that tomorrow. And then as we work towards the budget, how we're going to get the public finances back in order.
But how could Rachel Reeves have campaigned during the election saying that the fiscal situation was fully known, because she said Labour policy was, quotes, fully funded and fully costed, no ifs, no ands, no buts? She must have done the maths before you came into power.
Well, you can't add in spending that the government's covered up, because the previous government's covered up, because you don't know it's happened. Everything in Labour's manifesto is fully funded. So the increases in public spending that we laid out in the manifesto were fully costed.
Yes.
So, the increasing funding from closing the non-DOMS loophole, tax loophole, so we can fund 40,000 additional NHS appointments every week. That is already funded.
All right, but you fully costed, for instance, scrapping VAT on private school fees. You've suggested that will raise 1.6 billion. In fact, we find out today that figures from HMRC suggest you'll only raise 650 million. So you haven't fully costed it, have you? Because you're only making back half the amount from the VAT scrappage scheme that you thought you would.
It's all fully costed.
But hang on, these are HMRC figures. Are we not believing HMRC?
Well, we're going to work towards a budget later in the year, in the autumn, and as we work towards the budget, all departments, including mine, are going through a spending review process where we identify ways we can make the departments more efficient. We'll see where that ends up. I mean, there's no point speculating.
But it's a bit worrying, isn't it? If HMRC think that you're only going to claw back half the amount you hoped, you've then got your own 650 million shortfall on one policy.
I'm not aware at all.
I mean, it's in today's papers.
I'm not aware at all that they've said that. But let me give you another example of what we were told and what we actually found when we came into government. Prisons. It's such an important issue, because the outgoing Conservative government told us that there were enough places in our prisons that prisoners could be held securely.
Yes.
Shabana Mahmood was appointed Secretary of State for Justice, went into the department and was told that Rishi Sunak had received a letter ahead of the election telling him that there was a critical failure point being reached, and by August there would be no further prison places. So judges would not be able to incarcerate criminals who deserved custodial, because there would be no prison places. And we have had to take immediate action to stop that.
Well,
that
Alex
was something.
Talk, the previous Justice Secretary, did say he was going to have to do the same.
The Prime Minister, he said after the election, he didn't say before. The Prime Minister knew about this, had a letter telling him what it was.
I know, but we have known for a long time,
Steve Reed,
that the prisons have been full, haven't we? We've known that for a long, long time.
We've speculated.
That the prisons are fit to burst.
The Conservative government was denying it, but we now know that they knew.
I know, but the public isn't surprised that the prisons are in a terrible state, so Labour shouldn't be, surely.
I hope the public will be surprised that the outgoing Conservative Prime Minister covered up the true facts to try and get through a general election without being held to account.
We've got £20 billion black holes in the finances. So how are you going to pay to try and fill this black hole? We know who you won't tax. You're not going to tax working people, whatever that means. So what are you going to tax? Stories today that you're going to increase capital gains tax. We know that you're considering, for instance, scrapping tax breaks on passing down agricultural land. That will go down well with people in rural communities.
Well, there's all sorts of speculation, and that's all it is.
Well, how will you make the money?
It's speculation. Labour's been absolutely clear. We're not going to put up income tax, VAT or national insurance.
So what will you tax?
Because working people are currently paying the highest rates of personal tax since the end of the Second World War
you're saying
because
that
of the Conservative Party.
You've inherited a terrible financial legacy. We're getting the message loud and clear. It's 14 years of Tory rule. There's 20 billion missing from the finances. So who or what are you going to tax to make up that money?
What we're going to do is break out of this Tory doom loop of a low-growth economy leading to a high-tax economy.
Right.
And those two things go hand in hand. Labour's approach will not be to have recourse to further taxation.
So you're ruling out any tax rises?
Labour's approach will be to grow the economy, and we've already started making the announcements that will grow the economy. 1.5 million new homes is jobs and investment up and down the country. GB Energy is energy infrastructure up and down the country as we harness the power of wind, wave, solar and nuclear energy.
How much is the net zero
the 88
target
billion
going to
I just
cost
talked about that we hope to get into the
energy?
water sector is also jobs and investment up and down the country.
You're mentioning GB Energy. How much is your net zero target in 6 years' time going to cost? We still haven't got any idea at all.
It'll cut bills.
We had Darren Jones during the election campaign. He was caught on a secret recording that featured in the Telegraph saying it would cost hundreds of billions.
It will cut people's bills.
But we can't
it will help
circle,
people
Mr.
with the
Reid.
cost of living crisis,
So hang on a minute.
cutting bills and creating jobs and investment up and down the country.
I get that and I understand the argument.
And that increases the tax return to the exchequer without raising tax.
I totally understand the argument about self-sufficiency. Goodness me, we've witnessed with our own bills in recent years that we need to be more self-sufficient and not reliant on others for our energy. But there's a disconnect here because we've got Rachel Reeves talking about having inherited the worst economic legacy since the Second World War. We've got talk of 20 billion black holes. We've got talk of ambitious net zero energy targets to be met in 6 years' time, which is undoubtedly going to be costly. And at no point can any minister come into this studio and ever tell me how you're going to get the money to pay for this black hole to be filled. So you're saying you won't tax working people.
Investment predominantly.
Private sector investment.
Look, I know the water sector.
What incentive would the private sector have to invest further with corporation tax now up 6% from where it was before, and the Labour government now in its third week talking about increases to regulation and red tape? In what way does that encourage further investment?
What you're talking, those tax rises you're talking about were Tory tax rises. The Conservative Party did that.
Oh, so you're going to bring corporation tax down?
The reason the Conservatives put taxes up 26 times since the last general election is because they failed to grow the economy. Had they grown the economy just at the rate that Labour grew it, we were in power 13 years, then 14 years, there would be 50... So if the Tories were wrong... This is an important point.
Go on.
Had they done that, there would be £50 billion more in the exchequer today to invest in our failing and broken public services. It is growth that is the problem.
So if
the Tories didn't grow the economy...
OK, so if the Tories were wrong to saddle businesses with more corporation tax, are Labour going to reverse that increase? What's Labour going to do differently?
We're going to grow the economy. It was the Conservatives that went back to people's pockets time and time again because they couldn't grow the economy. Well, I'll outline these things again. 1.5 million new homes over 5 years is a massive increase in house building. That is jobs and it's investment both for the construction industry and all of the supply chains.
I mean, the housing targets that you've set are the same as David Cameron's, but OK, so building more housing...
He missed all of his, but
they built 1 million homes, I think, in the last Parliament.
We're changing the planning rules. We've already announced the outline of those. Angela, the Deputy Prime Minister, is going to make a speech on later this week.
But I still can't
pin you down. The Tories didn't change planning rules. We're going to. That's how you get that. In my sector,
so it's planning rule change equals growth automatically.
It does because you get more. You get more building. The Tories failed to build the homes. Planning is a major barrier to that. So we're going to change the rules so we get more homes built. If you look at my sector, I'm responsible for the environment. The water sector. We talked about water pollution earlier on. 88 billion. Private sector investment in fixing broken infrastructure. That's jobs up and down the country for people who are then employed, who then pay taxes. That's more money into the revenue, into the exchequer, and then we can invest it in public services. I'm just trying to point out we don't need to raise taxes.
We don't. OK, so are you ruling out raising any taxes in the next budget?
I'm not saying there won't be difficult decisions because we've got to correct the problem. But our intent...
We don't need to raise taxes, but we probably will.
The Tory approach was to tax people more.
I know. So
Labour's approach is to grow the economy anymore.
OK, but so I'm saying if you disagree with the Tory approach, which put tax burdens at their highest level since the Second World War, are you saying that you're bringing that burden down? And are you then, therefore, ruling out further tax cuts?
Over time, that is the intention. Over time,
people are looking at this.
Intention is to lower the tax burden on working people, but we do it by growing the economy.
But not, for instance, on inheritance and not on wealth. And not on property.
There are no plans to do any of these things.
Okay.
I see the newspapers speculating about all sorts of things. I see the newspapers speculating all the time, just as you do. Rachel Reeves is the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yes.
She will be outlining tomorrow the results of the audit that she has conducted across government. We then work through the spending review to the budget that will happen in the autumn. Tomorrow's not a budget.
All right.
But Labour's approach will be to grow the economy, not to pile on the taxes. That was the Tory approach.
We shall hold you to that, Steve.
So you should.
Thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you once again to Steve Reed, and we do extend that invitation to Chancellor Rachel Reeves to come on and discuss directly with me how the 20 billion black hole is going to be filled. Coming up next, I'm going to be joined by former Tory MP and soon-to-be Lord Craig Mackinlay, and ask him who he thinks should be emerging as a Tory leader front-runner. And as a former UKIPper, I want him to tell us how he thinks the Tories should take on Nigel Farage's reform. Stay tuned.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, as high pressure builds across the UK, that means plenty of fine and dry weather to end the weekend. Once any mist and fog clears across rural parts in the morning, that will lead to a bright morning and plenty of sunshine across the country for the remainder of the day. And with light winds, it is going to be feeling particularly warm in that sunshine. Turning a little bit cloudier in northwestern areas later, and it might just be thick enough to produce the odd spot of light rain, but otherwise plenty of dry weather and feeling very warm in that sunshine, particularly in the southeast with highs of 26. So later on into the afternoon and through into the evening, there'll be plenty of late evening sunny spells. Perfect weather if you have any plans in the evening, maybe even barbecue weather. So plenty of warm sunshine to end across the south and central areas. A build-up of high cloud in western areas across Northern Ireland and northwestern parts of Scotland. So hazy sunny spells to end the day on Sunday. But otherwise, after a dry and settled day, a fairly settled evening to come. Through into the overnight, we'll see a little bit of a change into the northwest as that cloud continues to thicken. And as we head towards dawn, that will be thick enough to produce some light rain here. But otherwise, it is going to be a largely dry night once again. And when we see those clear spells, we're likely to see the odd patch of mist and fog, once again, mainly in those rural spots. And taking a look at those temperatures as well, that means it's going to be a milder night compared to last night too. So to start the new working week, there'll still be plenty of fine and dry weather around across most of the country. Perhaps a build-up of high cloud, which means hazier sunny spells. A different story in the northwest, though, as we continue to see that cloud thickening, producing outbreaks of rain into the afternoon too. So a damp afternoon here, otherwise largely dry and still feeling very warm in that sunshine, particularly in the southeast where we're going to see highs of 28.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camila Tominey Show on GB News. Craig Mackinlay is in the studio, soon to be, let me just get this right, Lord Mackinlay of Richborough,
Indeed.
no less. But you haven't, so you got announced that you're getting a life peerage in the dissolution honours, but you haven't, tell me about, the King hasn't signed a very crucial piece of paper.
Yeah,
Craig.
it's quite an ancient thing. I went to the College of Arms this week to get the name agreed, a place I didn't even know existed, frankly.
No, quite.
I had to see the Garter Principal King of Arms. How about that for a name?
I love that someone has that job. What do you do for a living? Oh, well.
I'm the Garter King of Arms.
Yeah.
So he agrees your title, that then has to go as a letters patent for the King to sign. So immediately he signs that, which I'm hoping will be done within the next 7 days,
Yeah.
I will thereafter be Lord Mackinlay of Richborough.
And you must be absolutely delighted, because obviously for everything that you've gone through over the last, 6 months, has it been 6 months? A bit more, 6 to 8 months, losing all of your limbs. You then decided you couldn't fight the seat in South Thanet. To be fair, boundary change means it's now East Thanet. And last time we spoke, you were sort of thinking, I don't really know what I'm going to do, and you want to campaign for sepsis charities and all the rest of it. But to become a life peer, I mean, that must be a huge honour for you.
It's fantastic. I mean, it gives you skin in the game of politics, gives you a chance to get your voice heard, and I will be loud, as you can imagine.
Well, that's why we like you on GB News.
I'm sure
Craig.
I will be loud, certainly on issues of sepsis, certainly on getting the proper provision of prosthetics for people
one good
like
hand,
this.
but you're getting the other one replaced, but at your own cost, you've said to me.
Exactly,
so
yes. Yeah, the NHS give you these.
Which is good if you wanted to smash through this desk.
Yeah, I often say it's good for breaking windows and pub fights, but when you've got 2 of those, I'm not entirely sure what you can do with them, or you have to buy one of these for yourself.
Which is amazing, the bionic hand.
Yes, which can actually give you a life back.
Well, it's also easier to have a cup of tea with,
It is.
isn't it? Let's be honest. Right, so let's get straight into the politics of the day. It's interesting, this Tory leadership race, isn't it? I mean, let's talk about some of the righties who you might be more inclined to back were you still an MP. You can endorse a candidate, the Lords won't have a vote, but it doesn't matter. We're just going to speak about it anyway. First of all, this Suella Braverman not being able to get seemingly enough MPs to make it onto that sort of short list, or long list, I should call it, before they whittled down to 4 and then 2. Does that surprise you, Craig? I mean, she was the sort of darling of the right. She had supporters like John Hayes and that Common Sense group. They all seem to have defected to Robert Jenrick. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I was an open supporter of her last time round, and I signed her papers and everything else. I don't know. We've got till tomorrow evening. I mean, Kemi Badenoch isn't officially on the list yet, but I suppose you have to assume that she's going to get over the 10.
But we've kind of been hearing she is declaring tomorrow, whereas we've heard nothing from Braverman.
The 10 hurdle shouldn't be that hard. So I don't know where Suella is at the moment. I haven't spoken to her for some weeks, but you would assume she'd get over the 10. But saying that, John Hayes, Danny Kruger particularly, in the Common Sense group, has swapped his allegiance to Robert Jenrick.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's going to be... There aren't any new names in there.
No.
But, I know them all, and we'll see where it develops. I'm not coming out for anyone at this current time, but I will tell you what will be swaying me. And I know I'd hope I would have some sway in my association, say, if I come out with something. People say, oh, well, that's Craig thinks, and, we may be persuaded. It will be where position is on net zero.
Interesting, because I thought the dividing line was the ECHR and whether we should be members still or not.
Funnily enough, you might be interested. I wasn't that bothered about ECHR.
No.
I wasn't years ago. I think I am now because of the obstructions, but that very peculiar Rule 39 judgment, which stopped that plane from taking off 2 years ago from Stansted, first trip to Rwanda. That was Rule 39 that Priti Patel, at the time as Home Secretary, took advice from civil servants and said, I'll go along with that. Now, I wasn't that bothered because Britain complies with 80% of Rule 39s, which are this rather strange procedure of a judge unknown in chambers in the middle of the night, or judge in pyjamas, they often call it. Germany complies with 60%, and Spain complies with just 40%. So if we became a little bit more like Spain, I wouldn't be bothered.
Or like Belgium. I think Belgium has launched all sorts of claims.
I mean, it's like a lot of things. I mean, it's probably like EU membership itself. A lot of these countries weren't that bothered. It always seemed to be Britain that gold-plated everything. So if we were more like them, I don't think I'd be so bothered about ECHR.
But you're more bothered about net zero. So you want to hear a candidate saying we should abandon the target, or what would you like to
I think it's come to a stage where we need to revisit the 2008 Climate Change Act. Because, frankly, the ability to actually run a modern economy with that around your neck as something that has to be done because it's legislated for. It was made infinitely worse by Theresa May's change from 80% net zero to 100%. That was the last bit that really capped it off. I mean, what Labour is trying to achieve, the decarbonisation of our electricity system in just 5.5 years' time, is frankly impossible. If the last decade was a decade of the battle for Brexit, I can see the next decade being the battle for energy security and cost.
Yes.
This will take the Labour Party down, because I can foresee...
Really?
I can foresee we will get blackouts, we will end up with higher costs, and the public will not wear it.
But just explain the blackouts, because there'll be Labour supporters saying this is just scaremongering.
Well, I mean, if you're trying to get a full system of electricity supply through windmills and solar panels, it does not work. It cannot work, because you've got to account for the days when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. We are being sold a pup. And the trouble is, of course, planning is held up as well. Say you want to do a new road system, and it happened in Manston Airport in my old patch of East Kent. The campaigners against were always raising the Climate Change Act of 2008 says thou shalt not have new roads and new use of that might
we had a bit of it on the whole
carbon,
nutrient neutrality thing.
All of this stuff can stop things from happening. And until we address that, we're not going to get the growth that Steve Reed says is going to get us out of the reeds.
Steve Reed and Reeds. I want to ask you about Nigel Farage, because you were once a UKIPper, you then became a Tory, so you understand the dynamics of these two parties. I know that Reform is different to UKIP, but it's a party that's positioning itself more on the right of the Conservatives. Where should the Conservatives go from here, Craig? Can they out-Farage Farage? Should they even try? What should be the direction of travel?
Well, this has been a long story. I'm rather disappointed that in 2019, when Nigel, under the Brexit Party, set aside his candidates against sitting Conservative MPs. That was a broad and very generous gesture, helped us to get that 80-seat majority, that historic win. As far as I understand, nobody reached out to him to say, thanks very much, come in the camp, be part of the bigger tent. Because we're a big tent.
Yeah. So the Tories should have said, come in the tent?
I think so, and he wouldn't have been where he is today. I don't blame Reform for standing. They've got a right to exist. They've got a right to try and exploit a vacuum that we've created. We should never have allowed that vacuum to create. So we've got to fill that vacuum. Now, to me, that doesn't mean what many of our candidates, our Conservative leadership candidates, are saying, we've all got to be in this sort of centre to win elections. You've got plenty of centre. Go for Labour, go for Lib Dems. I mean, there's plenty of centre out there. There were more votes on the right at this general election. If you add up the Conservative votes, which collapsed, plus Reform equals more than the Labour vote, which was a very shallow vote, less votes than it got in 2019.
But is it about lurching to the right or just honouring the manifesto, Craig? Just honour your promises.
Well, I mean,
just do what you said you'd do in 2019 and then people would have voted for you.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
If you're going to say immigration is coming down, bring it down. If you're going to say taxes are coming down, bring them down.
I think the one thing that wasn't discussed enough in the election was the effect of COVID and that lockdown.
Yes.
I mean, you can't give out £500 billion of stuff, whether that's, Eat Out to Help Out and all the support mechanisms for employees and businesses.
That was the former Prime Minister's fault, right? He wanted to be thanked for furlough.
But
he didn't say that had caused economic calamity.
But it was hardly mentioned in the election.
Yeah.
And, this is the reason we've got high taxes and why we're in a situation.
Yes.
And the Ukraine war has caused the biggest, the inflation.
Yeah.
Nothing from what we did internally. This was external shocks.
Sure.
And we didn't really mention that enough. So that put us off course. There's no doubt about that. But, if we want to be Conservatives, there's a Conservative vote out there. It was there in 2019. It was a broad church that swept us to power. We should be going back to that and trying to achieve power on the back of, in my view, more of a right of centre than centre approach.
Lord Craig Mackinlay of Richborough, about to be announced as next week. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in the studio. Lovely to see you, and lovely to see you looking so well as well, Craig. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be discussing anti-Semitism with Dave Rich, whose new book looks at why it's still relevant and even more prevalent across the world after, of course, the events of October the 7th. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Football and gambling can go hand in hand and cause long-term problems. New figures show that young adults aged between 16 and 24 who have bet over the last year are more likely to report mental health issues compared to those in older age groups.
And joining us now to discuss this is Matt Burgess, who is a former gambling addict and now helps those to deal with their own gambling issues.
Yeah, look, I think gambling is one of those things that is so accessible now. You know, everyone's got a kind of mobile phone in their pocket, walk around with a kind of 24-hour casino, if you like. So I think it's really important that people realise that we have to sort of recognise that that is a month of quite condensed gambling, and we don't want people to sort of carry that on into their everyday life, because that's when it can become really risky and you know, it could become addictive.
I had no idea, though, that it was linked to first-time gambling. For the first time, people might be able to pick up and have a go. And then it doesn't end there. It goes on, because by then you've got the bug. Is that how it works?
You've got to remember, for things like the Euros, the World Cup, so you get a lot more people watching football and therefore potentially betting on football.
May I ask you about how severe your own gambling addiction got?
Well, look, I think there was a couple of touch points for me where I realised that things were getting out of hand. There were some times at university where, you know, I kind of thought, you know, I'm definitely doing this a bit too much, but, you know, kind of thought maybe it would move on once I left, but it didn't. It did follow me. And then, you know, I got to points where I was at my worst gambling 16, 17 hours a day. I was spending huge amounts of money. It can spiral out of control very, very quickly, and that was the important thing that we want to highlight is, you know, what can start as fun can become very, very dangerous in a sense.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be joined by the author Dave Rich, who has updated his book Everyday Hate, How Anti-Semitism is Built into Our World and How You Can Change It, which is available now. And you've updated it, Dave, because of October the 7th. So you wrote this book before. You've been involved with the CST for some time now. You wrote this book and then October the 7th happened and you felt you needed to update it in light of recent events.
Good morning, that's right. I've been working in this field for around 30 years and I wrote the book last year to really explain what anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish hatred is, where it comes from, why it keeps coming back when we think we should have left this prejudice in the past a long time ago.
Yeah.
And then, of course, October 7th happened with the appalling Hamas terror attack, this wave of global anti-Semitism in Britain and lots of other countries. And it felt necessary, actually, to update the book to reflect what's happened since then, because it does feel like we're living in a different world for Jewish people now.
Well, why does it keep on coming back? I mean, I appreciate that October the 7th creates a trigger, but this is sort of one of the oldest prejudices in the world, really, isn't it? I mean, this has been going on for centuries now.
I mean, that's part of the reason why it keeps happening. Something that's been around for so long, it's been so deeply embedded in parts of our culture and politics. It's been very successful at times in mobilising whole political movements and extremists, unfortunately. So it doesn't just disappear. And, you know, you can think there's anti-Semitism in Shakespeare and in Dickens and some of our best-loved culture, but also at the really violent, vicious extremes of society. And at times of real turmoil where people feel they're worried about what's going on in the world, they want someone to blame, anti-Semitism gives a very easy answer. And especially then when you have a situation with war in the Middle East, Israel is at the heart of it. Israel is the world's only Jewish state. Many Jewish people around the world feel deeply connected to it. And every time Israel is at war, we get these big waves of anti-Semitism in a way that no other foreign conflict ever triggers. It's a really unique reaction that I think reflects some of the kind of obsessions that people have over Israel.
Also, the hatred is directed to Jews even if they don't necessarily support Netanyahu's government, his approach to Gaza or anything. That's the other curious thing, the sort of lack of nuance in any of this debate since October the 7th. I mean, are you concerned at the ignorance that has been on display when people have taken part in marches and been chanting from the river to the sea, not really understanding how offensive that is to the Jewish community? Has something gone wrong maybe with our education in this country, Dave?
There is so much ignorance, and you're absolutely right. When we see these anti-Semitic hate crimes, people shouting abuse and threats at Jewish people in the street, they never stop to ask them what they actually think about Netanyahu or Israel or the conflict. It's just because they're Jewish and they single them out. It's racism in its most basic form. And then what we saw immediately after 7th of October, you started to get these big demonstrations happening. And they were organised literally on the 7th or the 8th of October. You had people with placards saying, we support the resistance. It was very clear what they meant.
Are you saying that was insensitively too soon, too reactive? People had just been killed at the festival and elsewhere.
I think that's absolutely right. And what you have is, at the core of this movement, a real hardcore of extremist organisations and leaders who effectively support Hamas and have no problem with what Hamas did. But then you get huge numbers of very well-meaning humanitarian people who just want the war to end and the suffering to end. And they follow along behind this movement, and that's where the danger lies, I think.
Would you be more comfortable if people on pro-Palestinian marches condemned Hamas more? I mean, because there is a difference, isn't there, between people who think, oh, well, you know, Hamas don't want to recognise them as terrorists, sort of support them in their anti-democratic ways, and they're in a kind of, you know, extreme subgroup. Then you have got the people who are on the marches, not perhaps understanding the complexities of it all. They don't want to be supporting terrorists, but they make that quite legitimate point about sort of protecting life in Gaza, where, let's be honest, thousands of people are being killed.
I think that's absolutely right. If these big marches had lots of people carrying placards, calling for a ceasefire and for the hostages to all be released, I think a lot of Jewish people in this country would feel a lot more comfortable with what they're seeing in their town centres. But we don't see that. We don't see those calls from the stage for the hostages to be released. It's very much a binary presentation of the conflict as, you know, good versus evil. And within that, you have these slogans of people basically calling for Israel to be completely eliminated, supporting what they call resistance. But in this context, that means Hamas. And obviously, that sends a chill down the spine of many Jewish people around the country because, you know, that's at a time where you've got rising anti-Semitism as well.
Is there a chill down the spine of the Jewish community in reaction to some of the candidates that have been elected to Parliament on the back of robustly pro-Palestinian campaigns?
You know, there's nothing wrong with people campaigning about all sorts of policy issues. But where you have these single-issue campaigns where there's a very obvious appeal to one particular community just based on their identity, linked to what's happening in Gaza, it almost feels wrong for that to be part of a general election when really we should be talking about more broad issues that everybody would connect with.
Yeah. I mean, Nigel Farage has said about sectarian voting, and I know you might not be a supporter of his, but he's basically saying that he's worried about the idea that people are kind of establishing support on the back of, as you say, single issues. You finish up not just with divided communities, but with large groupings of people with completely different sets of priorities, and that extends now into sectarian voting. I've never seen sectarian voting in my lifetime, not in England anyway. So these things are all very dangerous and very bad. Your reaction to that, Dave?
Look, it's not the first time that people have voted based on what really matters to them. You know, lots of Jewish people stopped voting for Labour under Jeremy Corbyn because of anti-Semitism. But one of the dangers of this conflict is that it is going to fracture our society, it's going to divide communities, and we need to find ways to bring people together, to find common ground, not be seeing, for example, Jewish and Muslim communities as in conflict with each other and voting along those lines. And I think that's the danger where you get these kind of very identity-based candidates who really only have one single issue, but also are only really appealing to one part of the community.
And finally, I mean, not enough is being said about the fact, very briefly, Dave, that there are still hostages in captivity. I mean, it gets easily forgotten, doesn't it? The world moves on. The families of these people haven't moved on.
That's exactly right. And an end to this conflict has to involve the hostages coming home.
Dave Rich, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Here's his book again, Everyday Hate, which is available from all good bookshops now. Thank you very much to all of my guests today. I'm going to be back next Sunday at 9:30. But up next, it's Tom Harwood, who's covering for Michael Portillo. Weather next, though. Hint, it's warm and sunny.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, as high pressure builds across the UK, that means plenty of fine and drying weather to end the weekend. Once any mist and fog clears across rural parts in the morning, that will lead to a bright morning and plenty of sunshine across the country for the remainder of the day. And with light winds, it is going to be feeling particularly warm in that sunshine. Turning a little bit cloudier in northwestern areas later, and it might just be thick enough to produce the odd spot of light rain, but otherwise plenty of dry weather and feeling very warm in that sunshine, particularly in the southeast with highs of 26. So later on into the afternoon and through into the evening, there'll be plenty of late evening sunny spells. Perfect weather if you have any plans in the evening, maybe even barbecue weather. So plenty of warm sunshine to end across the south and central areas. A build-up of high cloud in western areas across Northern Ireland and northwestern parts of Scotland. So hazy sunny spells to end the day on Sunday. But otherwise, after a dry and settled day, a fairly settled evening to come. Through into the overnight, we'll see a little bit of a change into the northwest as that cloud continues to thicken. And as we head towards dawn, that will be thick enough to produce some light rain here. But otherwise, it is going to be a largely dry night once again. And when we see those clear spells, we're likely to see the odd patch of mist and fog, once again, mainly in those rural spots. And taking a look at those temperatures as well, that means it's going to be a milder night compared to last night too. So to start the new working week, there'll still be plenty of fine and dry weather around across most of the country. Perhaps a build-up of high cloud, which means hazier sunny spells. A different story in the northwest, though, as we continue to see that cloud thickening, producing outbreaks of rain into the afternoon too. So a damp afternoon here, otherwise largely dry and still feeling very warm in that sunshine, particularly in the southeast where we're going to see highs of